Okay, amazing. And I'll switch it to speaker view. There we go. Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm sure as I go, more people will be joining, but thank you so much for coming to the second community event as part of the After Hours animation community. I'm really grateful for everyone being here, and please send in suggestions and stuff on how we can continue to improve and make this space better. And a huge thank you to our host today, Lije Morgan. A little bit about our host. Lije graduated in 2020 from Parsons School of Design with a BFA in illustration with a focus in animation. Up for all projects, big or small, they have always had an interest in narrative storytelling and love to create characters in their own worlds and environments. Lije enjoys working in many mediums, often combining them whenever they get the chance. In addition to animation and illustration, they also love game design. You might have seen their game as you joined. That one was on Snapchat, I believe. They say video games have always been a huge inspiration for their work, and they think that they've become one of the most accessible tools for education and entertainment. Additionally, each week, Lije and Gohana Wilson, another experimental animator in our community, sit down to chat with a different independent animator for their podcast, Boiled Over, which you can listen to new episodes wherever you stream your podcasts or for free on their RSS feed. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming today. I'm super excited about this. So today I was thinking we could talk a little bit about Rotoscope and my process. I love Rotoscope so much. I think it's one of the best tools in animation. So before going to Parsons and studying in illustration, as McKenna said, I didn't really have much of a background in art, or animation for that matter, of course. And so getting started, I always found it really difficult to get proportions correct. I never took any classes in anatomy, so that was something that was always really difficult for me. And then when I started animating, I immediately fell in love with it, but I had a really hard time making movements feel smooth, natural, kind of figuring out easing and timing of everything. And then I just kind of stumbled upon Rotoscope. And for anyone who's not familiar with Rotoscope, the technique is basically animating frame by frame, or there are some other fun tools we can talk about as well, over found footage or footage that you've taken yourself as a reference. Personally, in my own practice, I use a lot of found footage, but I also force some of my friends to let me film them and direct them. I film myself a lot as well. And I think, yeah, rotoscoping has become probably my most used tool in animation. And even when I'm not rotoscoping, I find that using reference is incredibly helpful, no matter what I'm animating. Just going frame by frame throughout a video and seeing how the motion translates into when you break it down frame by frame, because we're only human at the end of the day, and we don't have frame perfect eyeballs or anything. And so seeing how the movement and motion translates into a frame by frame method like that, again, even when I'm not rotoscoping, has been incredibly helpful for me. And so to start, just to kind of show you a little bit about my work and what I do, I thought I'd just share my reel, if that's all right. And so I'll go, and this is only a minute long, but just so you have a sense of who I am and what I do, I'll play this. So that's me. That's what I do. As you can see, there are a lot of different styles in there. I really love working in as many different styles as I possibly can, if that wasn't already obvious. But I think that's like one of the most fun things about animation is that there's so many different mediums and ways to work that, you know, it's really, I don't know. I always think like, why not just work in all these different mediums, except stop motion. I hate stop motion. Sorry, McKenna. And sorry to any stop motion animators listening. It just takes so long. And I do not have the patience for that. But if you do have the patience for that, all the power to you. But yeah, I mean, most of my work, I really enjoy combining 2D and 3D animation. And so normally I'll create 2D animations for characters in Photoshop. But you know, you can do that in whatever, they're all the same at the end of the day. And then we'll import those 2D characters into a 3D space, either in Cinema 4D, which is, you know, my favorite 3D application. I think it makes learning 3D really easy and accessible. It is really expensive. If you have a .edu email address, you can get it for $6 every year, which is great. I've never been more grateful for my .edu email address, but Blender is also a really great open source free tool, and I've been using Blender a lot more recently. And we'll be showing a little techniques in both Cinema 4D and Blender, just to go about combining 2D and 3D. All the applications for 2D and 3D at the end of the day are pretty much the same. It just depends on how easy they are to learn, I think. And you know, they can get like a little technical in their differences at some points, but they can all mostly do the same things. And so it really just depends whatever works best for you and what's most accessible for you. And so to start, I think I'm going to show a video that I just finished working on for a really great musician, Jackie Marshall. And Jackie reached out to me just through Instagram, and we got connected that way. And that's how I've been getting a lot of my clients recently, like for like the past 2 years or so, just word of mouth, people on Instagram. And I don't know, I kind of hate social media, so it's a bit of a pain, but just the more work that I share and post on Instagram, the more people share that, and then people get in touch with me through there. And Instagram's really become the main way that I get work now, which is kind of wild because I don't think that that would be possible a few years ago, or even, you know, a couple of years ago. It's really blown up, particularly during the pandemic, with you know, people not having a way to communicate in person. And animation's been really lucky, I think, in the pandemic, because people haven't been able to film anything live action. And so the animation industry has kind of, in a horrible, weird way, benefited from the pandemic, just because so many people have been looking for animation where they otherwise, you know, couldn't have live action. And so this is the video that I just finished. We have a 2D character that I drew in Photoshop and then modeled all of the rhubarb flying past in 3D. And one of the reasons why I love combining 2D and 3D is I've always really struggled with creating environments and worlds and taking into account perspective and shadows and lighting in 2D and drawing all of that. And what's made that really easy for me is doing all of that in 3D, because all the lighting and shadows are taken care you know, for you in 3D. You don't have to worry about camera perspective. You don't have to worry about if a character walks through a door, what's the shadow gonna look like. And so you can create all of that in 3D really easily. And I like to think of it kind of like building blocks almost, or sculpting if you like sculpting. And then, you know, creating this environment in 3D, throwing the character in there, and then having the two interact with each other. And so, yeah, this is just a 2D part of the video with no 3D added to it. The background, I just found a picture of starry sky that I really liked, and I just kind of recreated that a little bit and set it to be a perfect loop, and then combined these two in After Effects. And so for this one, this was kind of a multi-step video that went through a lot of iterations. And when Jackie and I first started working together, I thought it would be really cool because I just got my hands on this program for a job that I was working on called Character Creator. And Character Creator, I can open this up. There's little 3D Jackie. And Character Creator is incredibly cool. You can just take a photo of someone. We have this photo of Jackie here, and it will automatically put their face on a 3D model for you. And you can go in and tweak everything from hair to, body proportions, body size. I could make Jackie's hands incredibly big if I wanted to, like that. Go in and do everything. And so I sat down with Jackie, and obviously her hands are not this big. But I sat down with Jackie and we went in and kind of tweaked everything together to just get a model that she really liked. And then Jackie also did another video for this song where she was wearing this dress that was all live action. And so she sent me a photo of the dress, and using Photoshop, I was able to create a seamless repeating texture with that. And so we just put the dress on Jackie. This program's also great just because it has a bunch of really cool like pre-made clothing and accessories and everything like that. So we just found a dress she liked that looked similar to the dress she was wearing in the video, applied that texture to it, and we said okay with the model. And then from there, a lot of the time when I'm rotoscoping, I will use found footage or footage that I'm taking myself. But recently I've gotten really into this program called Mixamo. And if you haven't heard of Mixamo, it's really great. One of the most time-consuming things, I think, in 3D is rigging. And so if you're not familiar with what rigging is, it's basically when you have a 3D character and you apply a skeleton to it to deform the 3D mesh. And it can just take hours and hours and hours and hours. And if you just want to get on with the animation, it really is not very user-friendly. It takes a tremendous amount of time. And so studios will often have people who are riggers like full-time, and that's just their job. They just do skeletons all day long. And I have tremendous respect for them, but I would never want that position in my life. And so Mixamo makes it really easy. You can upload any model that you make. And so I had that model of Jackie from Character Creator, just like this. And I uploaded that to Mixamo right here. And it would take a while to upload, so I'm just using the basic model that they have here. But after uploading the model, you just tell it where the wrists, the elbows, the knees, the chin, and the groin are, and then it does the rest and automatically rigs it for you, which is fantastic and a super great tool. And a lot of the time it's not completely exact, but it's so much better than setting up the rig yourself, and you can always tweak it yourself later on. And so what's so great about Mixamo is they have this massive library of motion capture data. And so, I mean, I can just scroll through this page and you can see all of the animations that they have in here. And there's 52 pages of animations, which is amazing. And so I was curious and I was just searching, to see if they had a falling animation. And falling isn't really a natural thing. You probably wouldn't find a video of someone falling that would be really easy to rotoscope. I couldn't really take a video of myself falling how I wanted. Maybe if I were lying on the ground and getting kind of weird with it, but that just seemed like a lot of work. And so I uploaded Jackie's character to Mixamo, which is a totally free program. I think it used to be like actually totally free, and now Adobe owns it, which is a huge pain. So you have to have an Adobe subscription, I think. But yeah, I don't know. Adobe, I'm not a huge fan, honestly. And so uploaded my character, found this falling animation, which I really liked. You can just select it and it immediately automatically applies it to the character. And you can move the camera around however you want, which makes rotoscoping a piece of cake. You can figure out which camera angles you really like. There's all these options. I could change the body angle if I wanted to. I could change the amount that the character is flailing. I could, crank it way up so it's really flailing, and just do all of this to get an animation that I really liked. And so I did that, and you can see that the entire animation is 118 frames, which still, if I'm rotoscoping, would be way too much to go in and draw frame by frame. And so I went in here and I kind of found a part where it looks like it's looping back to the beginning, which, you know, kind of around like the 30 frame mark. That's close enough, you know, and then was able to render that out as a video and then import that into Photoshop. And so I did exactly that. And this is the animation that I created. Jackie doesn't have any hair here. And this was the loop that I made. So 16 frames, much better than 118. And then I was able to start rotoscoping from there. So my process for rotoscoping in Photoshop is pretty much the same for all of my projects. I have a few that are a little bit different. But basically, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll do all of my line work first. And so all of my line work here, just, you know, really simple line work. I can turn off the reference layer and you can see, you know, this is just Jackie falling right here. And then I just animated the hair with like a little wave in it, which was really easy to do based off of the reference, just because I could make a line that goes right around the ear, and then just, you know, figure out how it would wave and then loop that. And yeah, just went in here and did all of that. And then after doing that, went in and added some color to all of it. And if you ever use Photoshop for animation, I'm sure you'll know it's kind of a pain sometimes. You know, coloring can be the longest part of doing any sort of 2D animation. I think coloring is kind of to 2D as rigging is to 3D. And one thing that makes that really easy, and you know, I won't go too far into it, but there's something called pixel lock in Photoshop if you're not familiar with it, and you can just select a layer and press the question mark button. And what that allows you to do is I could go to my brush here and I'll just select a large round hard brush. And that allows you to color directly over whatever pixels are already on the layer without having to worry about like getting it exact, without having to worry about what your color is on your first pass of doing the line work. If you are coloring your line work, which, you know, I love the way that it looks, so I'm going to do that every single time. And then for the actual coloring itself, one thing that I've found really useful is setting up actions inside Photoshop. And so I have a bunch of actions to automate the coloring process, which really helps. And, you know, it still takes a little bit of time sometimes, but just to show you the basics, I could just select the dress, for example, go into my actions, and I have an action here that I've recorded that just expands my selection to be right at the outline and then fills it with my primary color. And so I can hit play, and then it will automatically do pretty much all of the coloring for me. And you can see, you know, like up here at the dress, there's a few areas that it doesn't perfectly get, but it saves so much time rather than having to go in frame by frame and say, okay, you know, and get that perfect for the entire character, which can just be a huge pain. And so then after doing all of this, rendering this animation out on a transparent background. So just turning the color back on for this, turning the background off for all of this, and rendering out like this. And after this, I did this project in Cinema 4D, but again, all of this is pretty much the same in Blender, and we can go over that in a minute as well. But here's the project in Cinema, and I can just render this out really quickly. I'm using Octane Render in Cinema 4D. There's a million rendering engines out there. I prefer Octane just because, again, I think it's like the most user-friendly, but I know Redshift is great, and I think free with it now, and Cycles in Blender, which is also free, is just, in my opinion, probably the best. I love the way that it looks and works. And so here you can see, it's going to take a while to load here, but I just have all of these rhubarb models, which I created and textured. and I threw those inside the cloner and then just made a bunch of copies of those so that I could get it to loop. And I forget exactly where it loops. I think it's somewhere at like 90 frames or something. But just being really smart about that, because rendering out 3D animation takes a really long amount of time. And I didn't have that long for this project. And so figuring out, okay, I want it to loop at 90 seconds, so I only have to render out 90 frames. And just rotating those and bringing those up really slowly. And we have Jackie moving in the background. And all the 2D animation that I do in 3D is just on a plane. And I don't know.
Lige.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry. While this loads, I forgot I was going to interrupt you. Do you want to pause for a minute and see if people have questions about the Photoshop? Because
Yeah,
I
if
think
anyone has any questions.
we were all I was really shocked that you could do that with actions. Like that's news to me.
Oh, yeah.
So I think there's people nodding their heads. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they want to type in the chat or unmute. I think
will also say, just for actions, you can also double click them and set a function key to set that up, which speeds up the process even more. So instead of going in and playing this, I could just have that set to a keyboard shortcut as well, which, it's a little time saver at the end of the day, but when you're doing a 16 frame by frame animation, it ends up saving a tremendous amount of time as well. But yeah, any questions about any of that?
Jeanette says you're so hot.
Love you so much, Jeanette.
Okay, no one had questions. I think I was just shocked. That's it. Keep going.
Amazing. Cool. So this is like the overall 3D scene. You can see it's like a massive tube of rhubarb, a tube of rube. And like here it is just rendered out. I'm rendering out on a transparent background so that it's easier to composite in After Effects. Just again, because I did have that starry background that's going behind the whole thing. And so Jackie, if we zoom all the way into the tube of rube, is just a 3D plane. And so that makes it really easy because planes are already flat by nature. And so I just have my texture right here that has Jackie, the animation. Oh, of course, she's not animated here. But all I can do is I could select my texture. And if I did want it to be animated, which I'll show in another example in a second, I could just set the end frame here so it works with image sequences. And I would always recommend working with image sequences pretty much until your final, just because when you are rendering out, if you're rendering out as an image sequence and your render happens to crash, it's so much better if you're rendering images, because all the images save, rather than if you're rendering out a movie and it crashes, then you're going to have half of your movie rendered out, and then what do you do from there? And so having this set frame by frame, each image is its own portion of the sequence is super helpful. And yeah, just setting this up as a plane, rendering out like that, and then I'll stop sharing on my desktop and share on my laptop for a second. Can we see this now?
Yeah. Quick question for you, Lige. Is the image rendering out as an image sequence, is that exclusive to Cinema 4D?
No, that's for everything. So rendering out of Photoshop as an image sequence, you can render out, definitely when you are doing 3D, would totally recommend rendering out as an image sequence and then importing them to After Effects. I think when you're rendering out your final After Effects project, that's probably the best point to switch over to rendering out movies or video files. But image sequences, you just have so much more control over. They're usually higher fidelity as well, rather than a .mp4. .mov can get pretty high fidelity, but image sequences are probably the best. And Cinema 4D and Blender both play really nicely with image sequences. You can even just import Photoshop documents. And I see we have another question too.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, sorry. I just saw that something popped up.
Oh, okay. Daniel asks, how are you aligning the longer rhubarb loop and the shorter falling loop to be the same length?
Right. I think that's a good question. So you can see inside of After Effects here. I have my fall in loop, which is just Jackie falling into frame right here. And so she falls in. That was one image sequence that I rendered out. I have the fallout loop. These are both 335 frames because the falling in just takes a little bit more time. And then the loop of Jackie falling herself is only 47 frames. And so doing all of this inside of After Effects just makes it so much easier rather than trying to do everything either in Cinema 4D or Blender, and just rendering out as few image sequences as you can, but to have a lot of versatility with them later on when you're compositing in After Effects is like a really smart way to go about playing with 2D and 3D, just because, again, it does take a while to render out each image. I think each of these frames, I think I set to render for 20 seconds. And so, you know, we have 335 times 2, 670 plus 47, 707. Yeah, I think that's math.
I didn't follow
but,
that, but that's okay.
It's just like all of these numbers added up, like over here for these image sequences. Like each one of these images took 20 seconds to render out per image sequence. And so it just took, I think, like a couple days to render total. And at that point, I really had to get started on the animation. And so, yeah, having one loop where it was Jackie falling in, one loop where it was Jackie falling out, and then one loop where it's just Jackie falling together. I don't know. I hope that answered your question about combining the loops. But yeah, was that it for questions so far?
One more is what do you mean by fidelity for like image sequence
Right, just
exports?
quality, overall quality. And so if you're rendering out as a .mp4, those are generally much lower quality than if you're rendering out as a PNG, for example. And PNGs keep a lot of the quality, whereas if you were to render out as an MP4 or a JPEG, for example, even if you are doing an image sequence, JPEG is typically lower quality than PNG, whereas PNG keeps a lot more of the quality inside the image. And so, yeah, I render out as PNGs. Adobe works really nicely with Cinema 4D and Blender. So sometimes when I'm working from Photoshop to Cinema 4D, I'll just export as a .psd, which you can see I did here as well. Jackie Fall is just a .psd file. And so then for this, Jackie wanted more rhubarb than there was in the 3D scene, and the 3D scene could not handle any more rhubarb. My computer started to crash just because it was so much geometry. And so what I did to go about that was I just rendered out, I think I can just open this up. Yeah, I just rendered out a sequence that was just the rhubarb with an alpha channel. And so then I layered that on top of everything so that it looked like there was more rhubarb than there actually was in the 3D scene. So we have two sets of rhubarb going on in the 3D scene. One that's just behind everything that kind of looks like a backdrop, and then one that Jackie's actually inside. And just looping that to make it seem like, again, there's much more rhubarb than there actually is, just because my computer couldn't handle it and rendering times were stacking up really quickly. But it's exactly the same scene, just with Jackie not there, that I just offset the time a little bit so they weren't directly stacked on top of each other. So, I mean, you can see I have quite a few layers here. I have the stars in the background, which I have, I just keyframed a position on, and there's a great expression in After Effects called loop out. And loop out is right here. I just have this set to cycle the loop and the number of keyframes here. And basically what that does is I have the position going down from top to bottom. So it looks like the stars, or excuse me, bottom to top. So it looks like the stars are falling up as Jackie falls down. And then when it gets right to the end of that, it just immediately jumps back to this first keyframe. And so we have that background looping. We have the base rhubarb right here of, just the rhubarb, no Jackie. And then I have my image sequences, which are kind of scattered all over the place right now, of Jackie falling in, Jackie staying in and falling, and Jackie falling out as well. And so that's basically how I went about setting up this project. I threw a bunch of effects on here just because I really like grain. I love grain and noise. I think it's like the best texture out there. And so I used like quite a bit of effects on this. You can see I've got all these on here. So first up we have, I'll just go over all of these. This looks fine. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of how this looks. It just looks very flat, even though there is kind of like a 3D space to it. And so firstly, I'll apply my VHS filter, which I love, and I put on everything. And it's really cheesy when you just get it right off the bat. I'll see if I can just pull that up. And so I kind of hate how this looks. I don't know if you can see much difference over Zoom, but it has these like cheesy VHS lines that pop up everywhere. And it has this like black thing on the side to emulate VHS tape that I really hate. I really only like it because it shifts the colors slightly and makes everything feel like it has a little bit more depth, like an analog video would, and it adds a really nice texture to the entire thing. So all of this is like all modular. I can change any of that, from the amount of tape damage to those cheesy lines, which I have set to 0. And you can go into the colors and change how much they split. And I love, again, splitting the colors just because I love adding color and vibrance to my work. And so the more color there is, the better. And by splitting the channels, the red, green, and blue channels of the video, you just end up with even more colors, which again, I love. It's my favorite thing. So I'll just go back to this frame of Jackie. So first I'll put that on. Lumetri Color is a great color correction tool in After Effects. It's free, it comes built inside of After Effects, and it basically just allows you to do very simple color correction. So because the VHS kind of dulls everything because all the colors are getting shifted into one another, Lumetri Color, I can boost all the colors, I can raise the exposure a little bit, and I think that makes it look kind of just a little bit better and brighter to start with. And I saw we had another question, McKenna.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of chimed in, but Ellery asked, wait, so does the Photoshop file do the same thing as a PNG image sequence in After Effects? And then also, can you explain what an alpha channel is?
Of course, yeah. So the Photoshop file by itself is not an image sequence. And so you can't do an animation in Photoshop, save it as a Photoshop file, and then import that. What I was doing there was just saving the entire image sequence as a .psd. So just as a Photoshop file, each image itself was a Photoshop file, just because you can use PNGs, but Cinema 4D and Blender both play really nicely with Photoshop files natively. And so just saves a little bit of time. They're still really high quality, so just decided to work with it for that. And they also work really nicely with alpha channels. And alpha channels are just transparency. So alpha is the exact same thing as transparency. So baking your alpha channel in to the image rather than using a mask or having other methods that play with transparency, just kind of like, yeah, baking that into the image so that it's your image and it supports alpha. So it has the transparency built inside of the image sequence is really helpful when you're doing this kind of method and working with 2D and 3D, just because otherwise it would be a compositing nightmare. And again, Photoshop files that support alpha, they support transparency like that. So do PNGs, so do TIFFs. Things can get like a little complicated sometimes with PNGs and TIFFs. So when I can, I just like to use the Photoshop file because the alpha, the transparency is already baked into that file. Whereas sometimes if you're saving as like a PNG or TIFF, and this is getting very technical, but there's like straight matted alpha, there's straight unmatted alpha, there's pre-multiplied alpha. There's all these different kinds of alpha, which, you know, can be really helpful when you're doing certain projects, but 99.9% of the time, just having a Photoshop file with the alpha in the file is so much easier to deal with, rather than messing around with any of that. I hope that answered your question.
And then one more question
Of course.
from Steve was, does Uni VHS come with After Effects? If not, is it free?
Unfortunately, no to both of those questions. I am really lucky again in that I have my .edu email address, and Uni VHS is part of an effects suite called Red Giant Universe. And in getting Cinema 4D for $6 every year, you also get Red Giant Universe. And if I just search Uni right here, you can see all the effects that it comes with, which are just incredible. They're the best ever. I was paying like $150 a year for it beforehand, which you know, was a lot of money, but I was happy to pay just because I love all of these effects and I use them in almost all my projects, from Uni VHS to you know, the glow that they have to chromatic aberration. They have a really cool one called prism displacement, which applies like a piece of glass to your project and then distorts everything based on how much the glass is distorted. So if you have a .edu email address, it's $6 a year, which is great. If you don't, it's a little bit more money, but you can do all of these effects on your own just inside of After Effects. I think the only thing that Universe VHS really helps out with is that kind of VHS grain texture, which again, like, you can just Google VHS texture and drop that on your image and work on animating that, and then you can split the channels with, we have like RGB separation inside of Universe, but otherwise you can just go to set channels right here, or a channel mixer. There's a few built inside of After Effects, and you can split the RGB channels like that. There's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube that are really helpful on kind of creating that effect. But all this is doing basically is splitting the channels a little bit, applying a little bit of blur to that, and then putting that VHS texture on top, which is just kind of a noisy grain. But yeah, you know, I don't think you need Universe VHS. No one needs it. It's just like, it makes doing all of those much better and much faster than having those set inside of After Effects. But I will say, if you can get an effect you really like in After Effects by kind of combining all of those, and again, there are a bunch of great free tutorials on YouTube to achieve a VHS effect for free. You can save all of those effects and then just apply them to any future projects you may want to use them on. Oh, glad you're a student currently as well. That's awesome. Was that it for questions for now, McKenna?
Yeah, that's it for now.
Okay, good. And so after doing Lumetri color, which again is just the color correction, I throw another noise on there, and this noise is already built into After Effects. And I don't know how well you can see this over Zoom, but if we just crank this way up right now, you can see it becomes super grainy. Oh goodness. Yeah, I don't think Zoom is too happy with this. But oh, there we go. Yeah, so noise is, you know, built inside of After Effects. You can just search noise and it's right here. And there's a bunch of great options to play around with the noise. You can use color noise, you can use monochromatic noise. And the noise is animated automatically, so you don't have to worry about animating that at all. And that's another great way to kind of achieve that VHS effect without having it. I like to double them up because I like things really noisy, which the Instagram compression hates. But you know, in my opinion, the more noise, the better. I love texture, and so the more texture I can have, the better at the end of the day. And so after the noise, I'll do a hue and saturation, where I just slightly adjust all of the colors. And so here I'm bringing up the reds. I'm kind of boosting all the colors overall. And with the hue and saturation, you can go in and select individual channels, which I think a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people just throw on the master and then mess around with it there, but going in and selecting the individual color channels is really useful. And a lot of the time when I'm animating in 2D, which I'll show in a second, I animate with primary colors because I'm not sure which colors I want them to be later on. And then I can import that into After Effects and say, like, if I animated the shirt bright red, for example, I could select the breads individually and go in and say, actually, I want those to be blue. I want those to be white, or whatever color I want. That's just a really easy way of being modular with your creative practice and like 2D animation, so that you don't have to think about everything all at once, which can sometimes feel pretty overwhelming. And then lastly, throwing another hue and saturation on top of that just to boost all of the colors, because I don't know why After Effects always desaturates everything. I've looked so much into it, and I've like been on so many forums. Basically, like the easiest way I can explain it is After Effects runs on like a different graphics processing thing than the rest of your computer for whatever reason. And I guess that's true for every program. So like Google, QuickTime, iTunes, anything that displays videos has their own like graphics processing. And for whatever reason, because Adobe is the way it is, After Effects makes everything slightly desaturated. And so just by applying another saturation on top of everything and raising that by 3 or 5, you get the colors that you see inside of After Effects rather than getting a desaturated render. But yeah, that was basically how I did this project. I was pretty happy with how it came out and love the textures and colors. And then real quickly, I'll hop into another project just that was kind of similar. I will not save this. So this project was, I was really into biking for a while, and I'm still really into biking. I love biking, but it was like all I could think about last year in the middle of the pandemic. And so I made this video, and I'll just skip forward a little bit, of this guy just on a bike in a 3D scene. And it's just changing seasons throughout the video. And it just all kind of loops together. And this is just a really simple loop that I created in Photoshop. The leaves are Photoshop as well. I didn't want to have shadows or anything for them, so I just composited those on top in After Effects. And basically, I just loved the way that the shadows looked from the 2D plane on the surface of the ground here. And so this was like a really easy way to achieve this effect. I had the background loop in 3D, which I'll show you in a second, and then basically just rendered out 4 videos, 1 for each season, and then just faded between them in After Effects. And so the way I set this up was exactly the same. I'll hit render here, and perfect. So you can see we have, again, our 2D plane right here with our character on it. And then basically the character is staying put while the background moves behind him. And I made one background, and then I just copied it over here to the right. And so that makes it really easy to loop the background. So as soon as he gets to where he is in that first frame, it just, the entire video loops. And so the entire thing is only like, I think 180 frames. Again, always being as smart as I can, at least trying to be as smart as I can about rendering out the fewest amount of frames as possible, because that does take a long time at the end of the day. And for this, pretty much exactly the same process, except I used actual video of myself biking because I wanted it to be a little bit more personal. And so this was the video that I got, and I couldn't find the original video, unfortunately, but the original video has me traveling from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. So I didn't have someone on a bike riding with me, having it be like perfectly centered. But what I did for this, which is what I do a lot of my rotoscope work, is I basically, you can see this black bar over here. I brought the video into After Effects, and I keyframed the position of the video inside of After Effects so that the video moves from left to right and keeps me in the center. And I think that's a really useful tool if you ever want to do looping with Rotoscope. just taking references of yourself, either walking across the screen if you don't have a treadmill, because who has a treadmill, or biking across the screen, or I have one in a second that I'll show you as well, which was running across the screen, but just moving the video from left to right, or right to left, or up to down, whatever you want, just to get the character centered and have that motion loop. And so again, just putting that into After Effects so that you can clearly see the background isn't looping, but the motion of me biking is actually looping. And then doing exactly the same thing that I did with the rhubarb. And going in here, originally I did just a little sketch, which I had in here as a reference. And then I'll turn on all of these. And so again, you can see very clearly these colors are very different from the final. And the reason why I did all of this was because exactly what I was saying inside After Effects, I could say the shirt is red here, but in the video we have it be white. And so basically that's exactly the same thing. I can just select the red shirt inside of After Effects, apply a hue and saturation to that, and say instead of red, let's just boost the lightness all the way up and have it be white. Same for every color on the bike. I wasn't sure which colors I wanted the bike to be. I wasn't sure which would look best in 3D. And so being able to manipulate that after animating and not think too much about color while I was just in the middle of everything was really helpful for me. And I think the last thing I was going to show for today was an animation I've been working on for like the past month or so. And this is a pretty similar technique to what I was doing with the bike video. This is my friend Arthur. I've known him since I was like 2, and I forced him to let me take a video of him running. And I think I have the video right here. And so this is a perfect example of what I was saying, where we have, he's running across the screen right here. And he really didn't want to do another take. So I was like, you know what, that's fine, whatever. And his form doesn't stay the same throughout the entire video, which was a little bit of a bummer, but again, I didn't want to force him to do another one. So I brought this into After Effects. I did the same thing where I, dragged the video, just keyframe the position from right to left so that he's staying in the center and the entire video is moving. And then because the form wasn't completely symmetrical throughout the video, I just went in here for each frame and imported the video into Photoshop from After Effects and cut out his head, just so, because his head kind of dips down, cut out his head, moved it up, kind of moved his arm a little bit as if I were playing with a puppet, and went through the video and kind of made everything symmetrical like that. And then from there, what I did was I made these alpha channels. Again, alpha just being transparency, usually black and white, if you are working with alpha separately from a video. And this was just really easy for me to work with because I wanted it to be very distinct for the purpose that I was using it for, and very clear. And what I was doing was I had paint pens and we were just in Europe. And so I drew each frame of the animation on a different surface. And I hope no cops are listening because I'll get in trouble for this. But basically, there's a great app for the iPhone. I think it's only a few dollars. It's called Stop Motion. What else would it be named? And Stop Motion allows you to upload your own photos and kind of play around with them inside of the app and onion skin them with the camera and do all sorts of fun stuff like that. And so what I did, and it's on my other computer, so I have to stop sharing on this computer for a second. But what I did here, and I'll share my screen here. Basically, I just took this outside, so I wasn't actually drawing because this is on my wall, and God forbid I draw on my own wall, only other people's walls. But you can onion skin any images that you create and just have them be shown through your phone's camera. And so doing that, I was just able to kind of hold my phone and draw the images like this. And this was a really fun experiment that I did with rotoscoping, but I'm not quite done yet. I want to add like a few more things to the loop, but it was just like a really fun way to use a program that I hadn't really used before, and go about rotoscoping in a way that I haven't really seen anyone else do, but I thought would be really fun and cool. And yeah, I think that's about it for everything. I hope everyone had a good time.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And
Is
thanks
there,
everyone so much for coming. Literally
yeah.
made my day, my week, my month.
Is there any questions or anything before we go?
I had a question and then I forgot it. But oh shoot, I forgot it.
You can always DM me if you remember. And I should also say, in case anyone doesn't know, like I'm doing animation lessons, free or pay what you wish, whatever you want. And you can just DM me on Instagram and we can set up a Zoom meeting to go over any of this or anything else more in detail. We can screen share, and you know, if you want lessons or anything like that, or like weird little fun homework assignments, we can do that too. But more than happy to Zoom with anyone individually and do a one-on-one to kind of go more into these techniques, just because I know this was kind of a broad overarching thing of all the processes and techniques. But yeah, I hope people had a good time, and you know, I hope to see some cool rotoscoping soon.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lije. And if you do use any of these techniques or experiment, like please send it to the account, because I'd love to like share it and broadcast it.
And send to me too.
Also next week, next Tuesday, same time, the stop motion animator Chris Sullivan's going to be doing an artist talk about sustaining long-term projects creatively and pragmatically. And if you are unfamiliar with Chris Sullivan's work, he does like feature stop motion films that span across like 10 years of production. So it should be another interesting Skillshare. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming tonight. And thank you again, Lije.
Oh yeah, thank you, McKenna. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, so much for coming. Couldn't be happier. And always feel free to DM me with any questions or anything.